That's it.
Man, anybody have anything exciting happen during the break?
I didn't have a cigarette.
You did not have a cigarette.
Nope.
Yay!
How long has it been?
Almost 2 weeks.
Oh,
Wow.
nice.
I think she's going to make it. What do y'all think? Smoke free.
Burn my dollar help.
My
Man,
dad made it 9
there you
months
go.
and went back.
There you go. All right.
That's encouraging.
We were talking about, we're on page 279, and before the break, we were talking about hypothecation, and the next heading there is deeds of trust. Now, y'all remember we said that North Carolina is a title theory state. Remember that?
Yes.
In a title theory state, we don't use mortgages. By the way, we don't use mortgages, but we call them that out on the street. Y'all haven't seen any companies called deed of trust companies, have you? No. You don't see deed of trust companies, you see mortgage companies. But in North Carolina, we don't use mortgage, we use a deed of trust. In fact, y'all come over with me to page, a further page back in the chapter here. And there is an example of a deed of trust. Y'all see that?
Yes.
I want you to do this. You see there, and I want you to just do this. We'll come back to this later. Where it says grantor, y'all see that on page 290? I want you to write borrower right there. Borrower. Now under that, oh, and I also want you to write mortgagor.
With grantor.
Yeah, grantor. Y'all remember we said the mortgagor is the borrower, and the deed of trust is the grantor, and also is the trustor. So write that down on page 290. Come back to the next thing. It says trustee, and I want y'all to put third party selected by the bank. And that's that Joe Jones I mentioned to you earlier. And under beneficiary, y'all see that? I want you to put lender, mortgagee. Mortgagee. So even though we don't use mortgages in North Carolina, we use the vocabulary of mortgages. And the very last sentence back on page 277 says what I just said. The term mortgage loan is commonly used for deeds of trust. Now, as we mentioned earlier, as we mentioned before the break, when you borrow money, you sign a note, and you sign, in North Carolina, a deed of trust, which in many states is called a mortgage. And when you sign a note, this is your personal promise to pay. As I mentioned before the break, if everybody was 100% honest, that's all you would need. But since some people are not 100% honest, we have a deed of trust also. By the way, in the note, we have the terms. So if we're paying 360 payments of $600 a month, that information is not in the deed of trust, it's in the note. It's in the note. And so, now in notes, we have several different clauses. And one of them is the acceleration clause. All almost all mortgages, notes, have acceleration clause. Now here's what an acceleration clause is, or better yet, let me explain to you what would happen if we didn't have an acceleration clause. If we didn't have an acceleration clause. So I go down to the bank and I say, loan me $100,000, I'll pay you back $600 a month. Well, about a year later, I didn't pay my $600 a month. Well, what could the bank do? Well, they could sue me for $600. That's all I owe them. Next month, I don't pay them. They could sue me for $1,200. That's all I owe them. Next month, I don't pay. They could sue me for $1,800. That's all I owe them. Well, you can see how ridiculous that is. So all mortgages, all notes have a acceleration clause that says, if you don't pay as agreed, we're going to sue you for we're going to accelerate the entire $100,000 and sue you for $100,000. Y'all with it?
Yeah.
And so to say this is a common clause would be a very understatement, if you will. And so another clause is a prepayment penalty clause. The good news is this is a very uncommon clause. And it's uncommon because, well, who has these clauses? And the answer is lenders that spend a lot of money originating loans. You know, when loans are created in the mortgage industry, they call this origination. And it's very expensive sometimes for people to find people that want to borrow money from them, especially if they charge high interest rates. So here's a lender that advertises on TV and does a lot of stuff to originate loans. And so he gets somebody to borrow money from him at, say, 12% in today's world. Well, the last thing he wants to do is be paid off. Would y'all agree with that?
Yes.
Man, he wants that 12% coming in, coming in, coming in, coming in. So he has a prepayment penalty. Prepayment penalty in the mortgage note that says if you pay us early, there's a 1%, 2%, 3% penalty. And so we have a prepayment penalty that we have to pay. And y'all might write yourself a note there that says prepayment penalties are the work of the devil. You can put that down. And actually, I was teaching a class about 10 years ago, and I had a young lady in class that worked for a lender that did these kind of loans. And she said, Ron, that's not fair for you to say these are the work of the devil. I said, well, I guess I shouldn't say that. She said, I said, but you know, if you stop and think about it, PPP, prepayment penalty. 666 upside down.
Sure is.
I don't make this stuff up. Just report the news. So, prepayment penalty. Please don't ever. Oh, and let me tell you something. You might ask yourself, how many of y'all are sitting there thinking, who would get one of these? Anybody thinking that? Mm-hmm. Yeah. The answer is somebody that doesn't know they have one. You know, they don't even know. When do they find out?
When it's too late.
Yeah.
Yeah, they find out 5 years later when they borrowed $100,000. They've been paying for 5 years. They go to get a payoff when they sell their house, and their payoff is $101,000. What? Well, yeah, you got a 5% prepayment penalty. Prepayment penalty. Man, I should have read that mortgage. Yeah. You know how you can tell if you have a prepayment penalty? Read the mortgage. Yeah, that's a great idea. Read the notes. So anyway, next thing is a due on sale clause. And You know, the best way to explain due on sale clause is, let me give y'all a little history lesson. And y'all notice as we've been together quite a bit, I talked to y'all about the old days because this is the only place where you can hear history from a I was there when it happened point of view. But in the old days being the 70s, it was very common that when I would sell a house for, say, $100,000, the guy owed $70,000. Well, the buyer would come along and give him $30,000 and take over that mortgage. And he would own the house 3 or 4 years. He would turn around and sell it. And the next guy would take over that mortgage. And oftentimes mortgages were taken over 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times. Well, banks make more money originating loans than they make collecting interest, especially if rates are going up. You know, they made a loan 15 years ago. Of course, in today's world, since rates have been going down, it'd be all right. But when rates start back up, they make a loan today for 3%. They don't want it taken over. What they want is they want it paid off. So they put a due on sale clause in the mortgage. They put a due on sale clause that says this mortgage is due if you pay it off. And so due on sale clause is due on sale clauses are in just about all conventional mortgages. How can you tell if you got one? I'll tell you a quick old story. This happened probably about 1995. I was out selling houses and I went out, called this expired listing. This guy's listing expired in the MLS. And I had gone out to list his house, and I was sitting there talking with him at his kitchen table. And his phone rang, and he answered the phone, and he said, "Rod, I'm sorry, but this is a very important call. I have got to take this call, and I'm going to be about 10 minutes." I said, "That's fine." So I'm sitting there at his kitchen table, and he went in the other room to take the phone call. And I'm just sitting there at his kitchen table, and he brought out his steel box. Y'all know what the steel box is? Everybody has a steel box. That's that box where you put all your papers and everything. Y'all got one.
Yes.
It might be a grocery sack, but you've got one. All right? Yeah. So he brought out his steel box. I'm sitting there on the table. And just to entertain myself, for no other reason, I'm kind of plundering through the steel box. And there's his mortgage. Now this house was like $125,000. And it had been for sale for 18 months. It had been listed with 3 different realtors. And there was nothing special about the house, there was nothing wrong with it either. Well, I'm sitting there reading his mortgage. He had like a $90,000 mortgage. And there was no due on sale clause on it. Now, by 1995, this was like standard operating procedure. I mean, every mortgage you could find had due on sale clauses, or most of them. It was scarce to find one that didn't. So I'm sitting there looking at that. He finished his phone call, he came back, and I said, "Is this your mortgage?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "You don't have a due on sale clause." He said, "What is that?" I said, "Well, somebody could come along and give you $35,000 and take over this mortgage," which, by the way, at the time, interest rates were 9-ish, 10-ish%. Can y'all imagine that? Did you say yes, Ron?
Yes.
I don't have to imagine that. I was there when it happened, folks. And, but his rate was, I forgot, like 7-ish or something like that. And make a long story short, I had that house sold in about 10 days. I mean, we were sitting at the closing table because I went back to the office and said, "Hey, I got a no qualifying. Anybody on the planet can buy this house. Just put down some money and let's go to closing." And so we sold it. He held a little second mortgage for about $5,000, and everybody lived happily ever after. And the moral of that story is, read the mortgages. Of course, I'm not telling you I always read people's mortgages. But, you know, if I'm sitting around with nothing to do and you leave your mortgage laying on the table, I'll definitely read it. So, anyway. Now, by the way, this list of clauses, this should be on the list, but, another word for due on sale clause, what is it?
Alienation.
Alienation clause. Y'all see that word in the book there?
Yes.
And another thing that should be on this list, y'all turn with me to page 321. Come over with me to page 321. And over on page 321, at the top of the page, you see where it says residential lending practice and procedures? Paragraph on top of that, they mention a thing called a subordination agreement. Y'all see that?
Yes.
And we have not talked about priority of mortgage yet, have we? That's because I jumped over to page 321. But has everybody heard of a first mortgage, a second mortgage, a third mortgage?
Yes.
What's the difference between a first mortgage, a second mortgage, and a third mortgage?
The date they were recorded.
The date they were recorded. And now this is important because let's say I own a $100,000 house and I've got a $50,000 first mortgage. What do y'all think? Pretty good bet I'm going to make those payments. Would y'all agree with that?
Mm-hmm.
What if I went out and got a $20,000 second mortgage? Still pretty good bet I'm going to make those payments. Wouldn't y'all agree?
Yes.
But what if I got a $100,000 third mortgage?
Might be lacking a little bit on that.
I might be a little remiss in making those payments because if they foreclose, I don't have that much equity. Y'all with me? Everybody understand that equity is the difference between what you owe and what the property is worth. Everybody with me?
Yes.
Now the truth is nobody would make me a $100,000 third mortgage on a house that already had a $50,000 first and a $20,000 second. Y'all with me?
Too much down.
But the priority of mortgages is very important. Now, here's what a subordination clause is. Sometimes Mr. Borrower, and this will happen more usually with an owner-held mortgage. Mr. Developer goes to Mr. Farmer and he says, Mr. Farmer, you got this 5-acre plot for sale, you want $100,000 for it. How about if I give you $50,000 down and you hold a mortgage for $50,000? And the farmer says, okay, that sounds like a pretty good deal to me. Are y'all with me?
Mm-hmm.
And that is a pretty good deal, wouldn't y'all agree?
Yeah.
Then the builder developer says, now listen, I want to do this deal, but I want you to put a subordination clause in the mortgage. And the farmer says, what is that? He says, well, I'm going to go down to the bank and I'm going to borrow $200,000 to build a house on this 5-acre parcel. Now the bank won't loan me the money unless they can have a first mortgage. Well, they can't have a first mortgage because you have a first mortgage. So what I want you to do is agree now that you will subordinate to the bank at a later time. And the farmer says, okay, I guess I can do that. So he does. So now the developer builder goes to the bank and gets a mortgage that's a first mortgage because the farmer agreed to let them butt in line in front of him. Does that make sense? So now he's got a $200,000 first mortgage and a $50,000 second mortgage. And the second mortgage, instead of being on a 5-acre field, is on a mini mansion, a $350,000 house. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Y'all with me? And so that's a common clause, or that's not a common clause. That's a clause.
So why would the first mortgagee do
why would the first mortgagee do that? Did y'all hear that question? Why would the farmer do that? Well, I hate to tell y'all this. Sometimes it's because he doesn't know any better. It just seems like a good idea. And a lot of times, that's the only way the developer will buy the land. And sometimes, by the way, can y'all see some danger here?
Yeah.
Yeah, which would you rather have, a $50,000 first mortgage or a $50,000 second mortgage behind a $200,000 first mortgage?
Let's go with the first one.
Now, the truth is, if everything goes according to plan, it's a good plan. But if things go south, that's what the farmer says. That's what the farmer's wife says.
Yeah.
Why did you do that? And the answer is, I didn't know any better. And,
But the thing is, what about if I'm gonna sell you a land like that, okay? But let's say when we do the lien, you're supposed to pay me that $50,000 on this amount of time. Now you're the developer, you're gonna develop, the residential, so you're gonna put your money into it. Well, by the time that you sell thing house, you already got my $50,000.
Correct.
See, I believe that most of those loans, you have to have a limit of time before you can pay my money back. I mean, yes, I'm gonna let you have, this mortgage, but, yes, even that's a secondary mortgage, but the bank gonna give you 30 years. I'm not gonna give you 30 years because I don't have those 30 years, but I'm only gonna give you 5.
if those are the original terms you made, that would be fine.
So, I mean, you can have a second mortgage and still turn it back around, make your money first before the bank does.
Yeah. Did y'all follow Marcus's question?
Yeah.
Okay. And so the question was, you could have had a 5-year payout on the second, on the $50,000 first that turned into a second.
Yeah.
It's still a 5-year payout.
So technically, there's no stipulations between the owner of the land and the developer as far as they're negotiating and working out the deal on the payment.
As long as he doesn't.
Yeah, whatever they could agree to a single payment in 3 years or whatever they agreed to.
Right.
And that's very common with those kind of deals. It's just a single payment in 3 years.
He's only screwed if he defaults on that loan and they're trying to foreclose.
If he defaults on the first,
Yes.
the farmer is in the deep blue sea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He is in
That's
the
the
deep
only
blue
time
sea.
it's gonna.
And so, but that's the way subordination clauses are. And you'll see them in those kind of loans, and you'll see farmers, by the way, I've had plenty of farmers, or a couple of farmers say, don't ever do this. Well, the truth is, it's not bad if you limit the amount that's in front of you.
Yeah.
Instead of 200,000, maybe it's only 100,000. And so in that case, you can't go too far wrong. So that's a subordination clause. Y'all come back with me to page 279, and there's some other clauses we'll talk about. And of course, there's another clause, probably the most famous clause of all, is y'all know who that is?
Yeah, that guy ripped me off every year.
Does that guy look familiar? Oh, man. All right. That's the Santa Claus. It's in almost all mortgages. So actually, mortgages run Santa Claus off more than once. So anyway, all right. Y'all turn to page, top of the next page. It says on page 280, principal and interest. In parentheses, it says debt service. It says debt service, which is a fancy word for
Mortgage.
mortgage payments.
Yeah.
For mortgage payments. Sophisticated investors call it debt service, as regular old people call it mortgage payments. But does everybody know that usually, most of the time, not just about always, but very frequently, when we make mortgage payments, we pay principal and interest. Now sometimes we just pay interest. But an equal amount of time, we pay principal and interest, and that is in the second paragraph, first sentence, most mortgage loans are amortized loans. Y'all see that word?
Yes.
Now the word amortize literally means to kill or to extinguish. So what happens is, we usually make our mortgage payments principal and interest. By the way, that was not always true. Actually, amortized loans were pretty much invented by FHA in the 30s. When in the 30s, prior to the 30s, it was very common that people would borrow money to buy the farm, and they would just pay interest, 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 interest. So they would borrow, I don't know, I guess $5,000 to buy their farm, and they would pay interest, interest, interest. At the end of 10 years,
15 grand.
the theory was that they were like putting some money away so they would have the $5,000. But the reality was, at the end of the 10 years, they didn't have the money to pay it off. So the bank would either allow them to continue paying interest, or the bank would foreclose on them. And in the Great Depression, the 30s, the bank ended up foreclosing on lots of people. And FHA came along and invented the amortized mortgage, which is very common today. And we'll talk more about that in a later chapter. And now, frequently, not all the time, but usually, we make our mortgage payments PITI. That's principal and interest, taxes and insurance. Because the banks learned a long time ago that people have a hard time making their tax payment when the bill comes. So here you are in your $300,000 house, you're making your $1,500 a month payments, everything's cozy with that. But in September, here comes that $2,500 tax bill. And, oh golly, it comes in September, but it's not really due yet. Well, let's hold off till October. Let's hold off till November.
Christmas.
Here comes Santa Claus. And next thing you know, our hero hasn't made their payment, and the bank figured out that's the problem. So what they did years ago, they invented what they call an escrow account. And what they do is this. They take your $2,400 a year tax bill, and they say, with your payments, we want you to add $200 a month to your payment. And then in September, when the bill comes, the tax collector doesn't send it to me, but they send it to the bank. And the bank gets my tax bill, and they pay my taxes. And I don't have to decide between Santa Claus and making my tax payment. Y'all with me? Which, quite frankly, I like this. There's a lot of people that say, I don't need the bank to collect my taxes. Well, suit yourself. I kind of like it.
Me too.
I kind of like it. And,
So does every loan have that
Most of them now.
rolled into it?
Both of mine
The
do.
No.
PITI?
Yeah.
not all, but a bunch. A bunch. And there are people that go to the bank and say, do I have to pay PITI? And the bank says, no, you got great credit, you're a good customer, you can just pay P&I if you want to. But for the most part, some loans, FHA and VA, they do.
Yeah.
But conventional loans, if you said, I don't want to pay PITI, the bank would probably work it out with you, depending on your credit worthiness, etc. And, but as I say, I kind of like it. By the way, what's the I stand for? Insurance. Insurance is the same thing. You got your insurance bill, $600 a year, and, you know, oh, God, a big lump sum, and the bank doesn't want you to have to worry about it, so they collect $50, $50, $50, $50. Insurance bill doesn't come to me, it goes to the bank, and they pay with my escrow money. You know what I mean? And now, there's different types of loans fully amortized fixed rate loan. And these are loans that require that you pay a constant amount to end of the term, which by the way is often 30 years. End of the term, your balance is zero. And y'all know anybody that's ever made the last payment on a mortgage?
Mm-hmm.
Well, you're in luck. And you do?
Yeah, I did.
You did?
I made my last payment. I sold it right there too.
You what?
I made my last payment. I sold my mortgage right there in the same spot. That's what you do. I mean, that's what you do when you sell a place. I mean, you will make the last payment when you just have to pass it on.
But I meant the 360th payment.
Oh no.
Yeah. Actually, I assumed a mortgage one time that was 27 years old, and the payments were like $80 a month.
Wow.
And
Lucky.
it was like,
You should have kept that.
well, couldn't. I made the last payment, and I forgot what the payments were, but they're like $80 a month, and like $72 of it was interest, not interest, principal. The interest was very little. It was like just a few bucks. And I made the last payment on that mortgage. And,
How long ago was this?
oh, it was a long time ago. Because it was back when assuming loans was common. And this loan had been assumed 10 or 12 times. And it was 27 years old when I assumed it. And I ended up making the payments, finally made the last payment. So that's not usual though. That's very much not usual. Now, top of page 221, partially amortized fixed rate mortgage. This is, now by the way, the word amortized, hold on, I'm going to get away with these clauses. Whoops, don't do that yet. Partially amortized fixed rate mortgage. A lot of times, you know, interest rates are very low right now.
Yes.
How many of y'all think they'll be low 10 years from now?
No.
Think they'll go up?
Yes.
You know, it depends on
That's
the
the nature
economy.
of the beast.
Well, that's all depends on one thing. See, the interest on the market cannot go up in the same time because then nobody will afford to buy a house. Okay, so right now the way how the house is price going up, the interest is gonna have to stay down in order for people to be able to purchase property. They both only see that's what happened when the economy collapsed. They both only went up at the same time. You know, nobody can afford it. You know, and boom, everything collapsed. So they're gonna have to keep one down.
I can't argue with that logic. Y'all agree with that?
If the economy's good, the rates will go up eventually. As of right now, the economy's not great, and all depending on the next 10 years, what the economy looks like. So I don't see them skyrocketing anytime soon.
That's the way I felt in 1978. Don't ask me for advice, I'll tell you. Because if you'd asked me in 1980, Ron, think we'll ever see 10% again? No, rates will never be that low again.
Here we are.
It's hard to tell. But what you said is exactly right. Because if the economy's bad, the only way we can get people to buy things is have interest rates be low. So if interest rates, gosh, what if interest rates were 10% today?
We'd be bankrupting banks.
Chances, and y'all wouldn't be here most likely.
There'd be a lot of foreclosures out there.
Yeah,
too,
there'd be,
so
but
I
anyway,
would be here.
when interest rates do start up, lenders, they don't want to get tied up for 30 years. So lenders say, listen, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll sell you this house today. We'll charge 4% interest. Okay, that's good. And we're going to set you up on a 30-year amortization schedule. And we're going to set you up on a 30-year amortization schedule. But here's the deal. At 5 years from now, your loan is going to have a balloon payment. A balloon payment. In other words, the whole thing's going to come due. So 5 years from now, you're going to have to pay that loan off. Now, who would go for a deal like that?
That's a flexible mortgage.
Who would go for something like that? How about a guy that's planning on moving in 3 years? You know, he's got a job, maybe a military guy. He's planning on, he's not going to be here 5 years. He knows he's not going to be here 5 years. So he might as well go for that deal. 4 years from now, sells his house. He's a happy camper. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Unless life changed and then got stuck there.
Well,
Yeah.
that's,
You better sell his house.
sometimes, like you say, things don't always go according to plan. But so his deal is he's going to make payments for 5 years, and this is called partially amortized because his balance starts out at 100, and it goes down to say 95 in 5 years, and wham, there's a balloon payment, and so.
Well, why do they call it a balloon payment?
Because when you get the bill, your head's gonna pop.
They call it a balloon payment, and of course that's not even a slang word, that's an official word. But they call it a balloon payment because when you get a mortgage with a balloon payment, when you go to the closing, they give you this little pill to swallow that's about the size of a garden pea. And you take that pill and it goes down into your lower digestive tract, and it's got a time release mechanism that's tied to the balloon payment. So if you have like a 5-year balloon, about 4 years and 6 months later, it starts to inflate in your digestive tract, and it causes a slight discomfort, and it gets bigger, and about 3 months before that balloon payment is due, and a month before that payment is due, you can't think about anything but that balloon payment, and then when you go in and pay it off, they give you this little pill to swallow that punctures it. Y'all are doubting the veracity of this story. That might not be the reason, but actually, and you know something, I joke about that, but you know, please, if you don't take any of my advice, take this advice. Don't ever get a balloon payment. Because if you've ever, anybody here ever had one?
No.
If you did, you would believe that story I just told. You would say, I know that's true, Ron, but I had a friend of mine down in what's that, Casadega, Florida. Y'all know Casadega? Y'all don't know Casadega? Well, next time you go to Florida, go to Casadega, and they'll tell you a fortune. It's like, anyway, Casadega, y'all write that down. Visit that Casadega next time you go to Florida. And he lives in Casadega, and he was going to buy the house next door to him. He called me up for advice. Don't you love it when people call you for advice? And he's going to get the owner to hold a mortgage. And I said, don't get a balloon payment. He said, why not? I said, oh, and I told him this story. He said, oh, that's not going to happen. No. You think he took my advice?
No.
Hell no. He got a balloon payment. 10 years. 10 years! Guess what year that happened? 2006. 2006. I was over at his house in 2011 for dinner. And guess what he wanted to talk about? You know, Ron, I got that balloon coming up pretty soon. Pretty soon, that's 5 years from now, but it's already on his mind. I was back over there about 2:13. He said, Ron, I got to do something about this balloon. I got a phone call from him the other day. I wouldn't even take the call because I knew what he wanted. And, actually, I did talk to him about a month ago, and he told me, he said, Ron, I got that property refinanced. I said, you did? He said, yeah. He said, I got it refinanced, and it was a miracle I did it. Because it was an old house built in 1910. It was a miracle that he did, but he got it refinanced. But stay away from balloon payments. Anyway, let's see. I had a picture about that, but I had a picture about that, but I'll bring that up later. All right, next thing, simple interest and principal from amortized loan. But you don't have to compute interest. Did you say yes?
Yes.
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 So if I give y'all an amount of money and an interest rate, y'all can tell me how much interest it is?
Yes.
Did you say yes?
Yes.
Where'd y'all learn this? I
Here.
didn't teach you. No? Alright. Y'all ready?
Yes.
You're gonna borrow $1,000 on your Visa card, and the interest is 18%. Question is, how much interest will you pay in a year? How much?
$180.
So it's $180?
Yes.
So it's $1,000 times 18% is $180 interest.
Yes.
Everybody with me?
Yes.
All right? So interest equals, what do we call this $1,000?
Principal,
Principal. Principal times, what do we call this?
rate,
Rate.
Rate, and
Time.
time is always a factor. So the formula for interest is interest equals principal times rate times time. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Principal times rate times time. Principal times rate times time. Principal times rate times time. Wow. I asked y'all where you learned that. Y'all remember where you learned it? I learned it in the 8th grade at Largo Junior High. Largo Junior High in Largo, Florida. And,
big on football, you guys suck.
what? We didn't even have football when I was there. I'm sure football had been invented then. But our teacher gave us this little memory peg. I over PRT. Now, this is a formula. Interest equals P times R times T. This is just a memory peg. But anytime you're looking for any of these things, if you will take this memory peg, it'll tell you what it is. The formula for interest is principal, rate, time. Principal times rate times time, what we just did. You know with me? What if I told you I paid $180 interest last year on my Visa bill, which I owe $1,000 on? Can you figure out my interest rate?
Mm-hmm.
Did you say yes?
Yes.
Yes? All right, let's try it. What's the formula? The formula is rate equals I over PT. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
I over PT. So, that's the formula. Y'all with me? What's the answer?
18%.
The calculator says 0.18. We put the $1,000 in there, times 1 year, we paid $180 in interest, and the calculator says 0.18. Everybody good?
Yes.
Could we do the same thing if I told you I paid 18% interest, which was $180 on my Visa bill last year, and the question is, how much do I owe Visa? Formula is P equals I over RT. I paid 18% interest for 1 year. Last year I paid $180. Calculator says I owe $1,000. Everybody good? Everybody good?
Yes.
For sure.
Yes.
So on the test. Are y'all with me?
Yes.
Did you say yes?
Yes.
All right. Now, top of page 281, top of page, okay, top of the next page, page 282, it mentions usury. Y'all see that word? Anybody know what usury is?
Yeah.
Did you say yes?
Yeah.
Yes.
Did you say yes?
Yeah.
You look like you got an example there, Jason.
Yeah, I mean, we see usury all the time around military bases and stuff.
In a military base.
Yeah.
How's that?
Well, you always got some guy that has a little better off than others that will be willing to loan you X amount of dollars to go out for the weekend. As long as next payday comes, you pay him back plus X amount of dollars in return.
I assume the second X is like
Yeah, a little bit much.
a little bit more than allowed by,
Yeah.
is that legal?
No.
No, but it happens all the time.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Oh, that's what it usually, that's awesome.
Yeah, like a loan. She's a loan shark, basically. Yeah.
Okay, so loan sharks are you, because what usury is charging more interest than allowed by law. It's charging more interest than allowed by law. So, look at the, it says usury laws are state laws and federal laws, but look at the last sentence in that thing where it says, the little gray box says in North Carolina. What does it say? North Carolina exempts all residential first deeds of trust from state usury laws.
So why does North Carolina do that? Why would they want to do that?
Did y'all hear the question? Why would North Carolina exempt first mortgages, first deeds of trust from usury laws?
Because it's North Carolina.
Well, now by the way, this is hard to imagine today because interest rates are 3.5%, 4% today. But remember I told y'all about the bad old days? And y'all should have been there. They were such good times. Interest rates were 13, 14, 15%. The highest loan I ever closed for a customer was at 15%. In fact, we used to practice standing in front of a mirror telling people how much their payments were. And what we try to do is tell them the payment without flinching, you know. And if you could do that, you know, so how much are my payments, Ron? A month. What'd you say, Ron? I said $1,500. No, I didn't want the square feet, Ron. I wanted the payment. It was only 1,000 square feet. The payment's 1,500. Y'all should have been there. Those are the good old days. But now think about this. Think about this. Interest rates across America. Interest rates across America are 13, 14, 15%. Well, what if North Carolina had a usury law that says you can't loan money at over 12%? What's going to happen?
They're gonna come up.
Nobody is going to loan money in North Carolina. By the way, Texas had a 12% usury rate in 1980, and they quickly did away with that because they were out of business. The whole state's out of business. Nobody's loaning any money because, you know, let's go somewhere where we can charge 15, 16. But at that time it was 18% in Florida, and rates actually got beyond 18%, and it was a good time. Y'all should have been there. So you definitely learn how to sell. You learn how to tell people their payments, even if you do have to practice it in front of a mirror. So anyway, but that's the reason. Oh, speaking of the good old days, let me give y'all a little history lesson about discount points. Who's heard of discount points? Let's see. Okay, very few hands. Well, here's the way discount points work. And once again, let's go back to the old days. When I started selling real estate, FHA and VA rates were controlled by Congress. Congress says, FHA, if you get an FHA loan, Mr. Lender, you cannot charge more than 7%. Well, at that time, interest rates were 7.5%, maybe 8%. Well, wait a minute, let me get this straight. Congress says you can't charge more than 7%. Mr. Buyer wants to get an FHA loan with a very small down payment, or Mr. Veteran wants to get a VA loan with no down payment. Mr. Seller would like to sell his house to one of these people. But Congress says you can't charge more than 7%. Well, okay, what's going to happen? Nothing's going to happen. That lender's not going to make that FHA or VA loan. So what happened was they invented discount points. And by the way, these were invented way back in the 40s, right after World War II. They said, listen, we'll loan that money to Mr. Veteran, we'll loan that money to Mr. needs a small down payment, if, Mr. Seller, if you will pay us some discount points. How much? Well, they had this formula they came up with back then. They had this formula that says for every discount point paid, and here's what a discount point is. You go out and borrow, back in those days, $40,000 to get a big loan. So you borrow $40,000, and the lender says, we want a 7.25% yield on the loan. Y'all familiar with that word, yield, in financial terms? It's basically the rate of return. Did y'all say yes?
Yes.
So we want a 7.25% yield, but the law back in the 70s says you can only charge 7%. Okay, well, they came out with this formula that if you pay 1 point, which is 1%, it will increase the yield by 1/8%. Well, we want to increase the yield by 1/4%. Does everybody understand that 1/4 is 2/8? Lowest common denominator. Remember that?
Yes.
Did you say yes?
Yes.
So, Mr. Lender says if you'll pay us 2% in cash, how much money is that? $800. We'll loan your customer money at 7%. Now this has been going on through the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s. In the early 80s, they quit having Congress control FHA and VA rates. Today, they're just controlled by the market. And so today, it's controlled by the market. So what happens is, the market says, you can charge any rate you want to, but lenders got so used to charging, they just keep on charging. And people keep on paying. Are y'all with it? They've been going on forever. So they say, okay, you want to borrow money at 3%? We can do that if you'll pay 2 points, cash up front. So, and today, these are paid by the buyer, the seller, whoever agrees to. Anybody who wants to can pay them. So, buyer pays the $800 to the lender. He loans them the money at 2%. I mean, at what seems like a bargain rate. Are y'all with me?
Yes.
Are you sure?
Yes.
All right. The next thing we need to talk about is amortizing a mortgage. The next thing we need to talk about is amortizing a mortgage. And this is where we take a mortgage with a payment and we figure out what the balance is after 1 or 2 payments. And so I got a formula up here on the board. I got a formula for you. Oops. Now let me tell y'all why we need to learn this. You know, correct me if I'm wrong, but some of y'all kind of have an attitude that I only want to learn what's on the test, and the only reason I want to learn it is because it's on the test. But you know, there's so many things in this class that you think, I don't see where there's any relevance to that. But it's a funny thing about this. This was on the exam when I took it 100 years ago, and I remember learning it in class. I was out one day showing houses to this young couple. this is probably about 15 years ago. And they were a young couple. They were looking at $140,000 houses. They had $30,000 to put down, on a $110,000 mortgage, they're pre-qualified. So we're out looking at houses. And you know, when you're looking at houses, it doesn't matter if it's 140 or 240 or 340 or 440. It's the same old story every time. You go look at houses and they always say, well, I wish it was a little nicer. I wish the bedrooms were bigger. I wish the yard was bigger. I wish the house was bigger. Well, it would be if your mortgage was bigger, if your budget was bigger. But, you know, but I was out showing houses to a young couple, and I've been listening to that all day. About 2:30 in the afternoon, pulled up in front of this house. This is a realtor's delight. Y'all familiar with the word curb appeal?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Did this house have curb appeal? I mean, it was just gorgeous. It was one of these ranch-style houses, had double doors, had 2 pecan trees in the front yard, which are very unusual down where I live. And we're sitting there in front of that house. They said, Ron, are you sure this house is only 140? I'm looking at the thing. I said, yeah, it's 140. They said, man, this is nice. I said, it sure is. We're looking at it. I said, let's go inside. So it was empty. We walked up to the front door, and it had double doors. I told you that. I love double doors. Whenever I show an empty house with double doors, I like to just throw the doors open. I have a multi-lock key, you know, I throw open these double doors. Holy moly. This thing was prettier on the inside than it was the outside. It had this big Chattahoochee rock chimney in the living room. It had this dining room over there with double French doors going out to a patio that had this beautiful waving view. This couple standing there. They go walking down the hall to the master bedroom. They go walking in the master bedroom. They're standing there. Beautiful set of French doors, that same gorgeous view out the back. And they're standing there, and they reach over and they start holding hands. This is not a salesmanship class, but this is called a buying signal, just so y'all know. So they're standing there and said, Ron, we like this. And the guy said, Ron, can I ask you a question? Which, by the way, this is not a salesmanship class, but when people ask questions, that's a buying signal. They don't ask questions about houses they don't like. He said, Ron, can I ask you a question? I said, sure. He said, you said that if we put $30,000 down and we got a $110,000 mortgage, you said interest rates are 7.75% right now. Is that right? I said, yeah. He said, you said our payments would be $787 a month. Is that right? I said, yeah. He said, Ron, can you tell me what my balance would be after one payment? And I thought to myself, yeah, I can do that. I know how to do that. And I went out to I said, I got to run out to the car and get a calculator. He said, would you mind? I said, no. So I went out to the car. I'm sitting there doing this arithmetic, and I'm thinking to myself, this is why they put this on the state exam. You just never know when you're going to need to know how to do this. Y'all with me? Well, we got our formula on the board. Multiply, divide, subtract, subtract. Can y'all help me out here? How much did I say they're borrowing? $110,000 times the rate. What does this number look like as a decimal fraction?
0.07.
What?
75.
0.0775.
0.0 $775. Is that right?
Yep.
Yeah,
Is that right?
yes.
Y'all know that, that's basic arithmetic. So we're gonna multiply the principal times the rate, help me out,
8,525.
and what's the name of that number?
The annual interest.
Annual interest. But we don't care about the annual interest, we wanna know about the monthly interest. So we're gonna divide that by 12, what are we gonna get? How much?
You rounded off at 710. 710.
And no change?
That's, the change was .42.
4.2? What's the name of that number?
Your monthly
Monthly
interest.
interest.
Monthly interest. So this is the monthly interest, is that right? Step next, our payment is $787 a month minus, y'all with me on this? $787 a month is the payment.
Yeah.
We're going to subtract from that the $710. By the way, the payment is principal and interest, is that right? Is that right?
Yeah,
Did you say yes?
yes.
This is how we figure out how much their payments are.
This is how much- This is how we figure out not how much their payments are, how much of their payment is going toward interest.
Well, how do we figure out how much their payments are?
Well, for our purposes in this illustration, it's given in the question. But in real life, y'all come with me over to page 324. Y'all see this chart on page 324? Y'all see that? So,